Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where we discuss leading political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. We have a big episode today. Let's jump in. It's official. China's exports to the United States are collapsing. However, despite this, China's exports overall rose 8.1% in April, beating expectations even as shipments to the US plunged. What's going on? The drop in US-bound exports is down 21% year-on-year, highlighting the immediate impact of escalating trade tensions between the world's two largest economies. However, official customs data released today, show Chinese exports have pivoted swiftly, boosting sales to other markets. Exports to India, an association of Southeast Asian nations, surged more than 20%, while shipments to the EU climbed 8%. This diversification helped offset the dramatic US slowdown. Though overall export growth slowed from March's 12% pace, imports declined 0.2% for the second consecutive month, highlighting once again China's chronic weakness in consumption. This has resulted in a $96 billion trade surplus in the month of April. Imports from the US also shrank by nearly 14% as China retaliated with its own tariffs. The April figures mark the first hard data since the trade war intensified, with analysts warning the worst effects are yet to come. Without tariff relief, bilateral trade worth nearly $690 billion in 2024 could completely collapse, raising costs for industries and consumers alike. The White House is reportedly considering tariff cuts to below 60% as a starting point in negotiations, hoping China might reciprocate. We will discuss this shortly. Quote, without tariff relief, pressure on growth will intensify, end quote, warned Bloomberg economists in a note today. This is Eric Zhu and David Chu. Many outlets have used the word resilient to describe China's trade numbers in the face of this global trade reset and its collapse in US exports. Some analysts, however, push back against this way of seeing the situation, saying that the devil is very much in the details. For example, Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis expressed today, quote, since March, I've argued that the word resilience will be trotted out every month in relation to Chinese exports, mainly because unless the US is able to reduce its trade deficit sharply this year, which I do not expect, we are far more likely to see a shift in trade rather than a contraction. So while China's trade surplus with the US declines along with its exports, it will be replaced with a rising trade surplus and rising exports with the rest of the world. The rest of the world in turn will see rising trade surpluses and exports to the US, and so trade is likely to remain as unbalanced as ever, with China and the US still playing their roles as biggest net absorber and biggest net provider of global demand, respectively. That's why Chinese exports rose 8.1% in US dollar terms and 7.5% in RMB terms, both above very low expectations. Imports also performed better than expected, declining by 0.2% in US dollar terms and rising by 0.8% in RMB terms. The important story, as ever, is the inability of domestic demand, as reflected in imports, to keep pace with domestic production as reflected in exports. The net result in April was a monthly surplus of $96 billion, by far the biggest April surplus we've ever seen. This was reflected in the year-to-date numbers. In the first 4 months of 2025, China's exports rose 7.5% to 8.39 trillion RMB, while imports fell 4.2% to 5.75 trillion RMB, leaving a surplus of 2.64 trillion RMB, or a very high 6.1% of the period's GDP. My friends in manufacturing tell me that they are under huge pressure to reduce wages and fire workers, but they're under a lot of pressure by local governments to show higher growth numbers, and this partly explains why exports continue to rise much faster than imports. Next week we will get the industrial output and retail sales numbers, and I expect them to show the same pattern. Output is growing even as businesses are struggling to make money, and consumption continues to drag. End quote. That is the devil in the detail. Next up, and speaking of the US-China trade conflict, the Trump administration is considering a sharp reduction in tariffs on Chinese goods, potentially slashing the headline rate from 145% to between 50 and 54% as early as next week, according to multiple sources cited by the New York Post first and then several other US-based outlets. The move would mark the most significant step yet in the administration's trade war strategy and comes just days ahead of high-level negotiations with Chinese officials in Switzerland. US President Donald Trump hinted at the possibility during comments to reporters on yesterday, saying, quote, "Right now, you can't get any higher. It's at 145%, so we know it's coming down. I think we're going to have a very good relationship," end quote. Trump added that he expects substantive progress during the upcoming talks with Vice Premier Li Khefeng, suggesting that both sides are signaling readiness to walk back from what has been a de facto trade embargo. According to sources familiar with the deliberations, the proposed cut is not unconditional. Quote, "They're going to be bringing it down to 50% while the negotiations are going," end quote, one insider said. The idea appears to be to create space for dialogue by offering a potential tariff rollback as a goodwill gesture, or more strategically, to give Beijing time to respond with a reciprocal move before formal meetings begin. Trade duties on goods from neighboring Asian countries may also be reduced to 25%, signaling a broader recalibration of tariff policy. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent acknowledged this week that a 145% rate is, quote, "not sustainable," end quote, echoing concerns from major US retailers that current levels are harming supply chains and raising consumer prices. The backdrop to the renewed push for talks includes not only economic interests, but also geopolitical dynamics. The US and China have in recent weeks been engaged in behind-the-scenes discussions on fentanyl precursor chemicals, with Beijing signaling a willingness to address Washington's concerns in exchange for improved diplomatic footing. Trump's team reportedly provided China with a list of steps it wants to see, including stronger penalties for Chinese companies linked to fentanyl production. While a cut to 50% would represent a heavy tariff burden, it would be a notable step away from the punitive stance Trump adopted earlier this year. Whether it leads to broader de-escalation remains to be seen. But for now, the move offers a potential opening to one of the most contentious trade disputes in decades. And if you want to be on top of our ongoing coverage of this huge dispute, part of a wider Cold War between the US and China, make sure you're subscribed to China Update, hit the bell notification icon, and you will be. And if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Let's continue. Amid a fog of conflicting reports and nationalist fervor, signs are emerging that Pakistan may have used Chinese-made J-10C fighter jets to shoot down at least 2 Indian warplanes in the latest flare-up between the nuclear-armed rivals. According to 2 US officials cited by UK-based Reuters, there is high confidence that J-10Cs supplied by China to Pakistan were used to launch air-to-air missiles in operation, marking a potential significant milestone for China's defense exports. One of the downed Indian aircraft was reportedly a French-made aircraft, though the exact type of missile used remains unclear. Analysts and open-source defense watchers suspect the long-range Chinese PL-15 missile was involved, a radar-guided weapon designed to rival the American AIM-120D. If confirmed, the engagement would mark the first known successful use of PL-15s in live combat, leading credence to China's claims of its growing parity with Western arms systems. Pakistan's foreign minister went even further in a parliamentary address, claiming that 5 Indian jets were downed along the contested border, all by Chinese J-10C fighters. He added that Beijing had been briefed in real time, with China's ambassador visiting Pakistan's foreign office just hours after the confrontation began. Reactions in China have been effusive. On Weibo, the Chinese equivalent of X, formerly known as Twitter, nationalists celebrated the event as vindication of China's defense manufacturing prowess. Former Global Times editor and prominent nationalist commentator Hu Xijin claimed the skirmish demonstrated that China had, quote, completely surpassed, end quote, France and Russia in military capability. However, not all signs point to an unqualified victory for Chinese hardware. Indian media sources, not independently verified, claim the Indian forces destroyed Chinese-made HQ-9P and HQ-16 missile defense systems during the same engagement. If true, it could complicate Beijing's efforts to use this conflict as a showcase for its weapons platforms. For now, Pakistan's deployment of Chinese jets appears to have delivered both tactical results and a propaganda boost for Beijing. But in a region rife with misinformation and competing claims, the long-term impact on China's arms sales and strategic clout, not to mention whether any of this is accurate, remains to be seen. And finally for today, this week General Secretary Xi Jinping is in Moscow for a 4-day state visit as both countries seek to strengthen their alignment in the face of intensifying geopolitical friction with the US and her allies. The visit, which includes participation in commemorations marking the 80th anniversary of the Soviet victory in the Great Patriotic War, that is World War II, underscores the symbolic and strategic significance of the growing partnership between Beijing and Moscow, despite attempts in the West to perform a so-called reverse Nixon, pulling Moscow away from Beijing. According to state-run Xinhua, Xi's visit is expected to, quote, inject new momentum, end quote, into the bilateral relationship and, quote, demonstrate the two major countries' commitment to safeguarding the outcomes of World War II, upholding international fairness and justice, and maintaining world peace and stability. End quote. She joined Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Victory Day parade in Red Square today, Friday, alongside other leaders. China's People's Liberation Army has also sent an honor guard to participate in parades in both Moscow and Minsk, a first for Belarus, signaling deepening military ties. Yesterday, Thursday, Xi and Putin held extensive bilateral talks covering the Ukraine conflict, US-Russia tensions, and expanded cooperation under BRICS and the G20. Discussions also included energy cooperation, such as expediting the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline, and broader economic integration. The two leaders issued a joint statement reaffirming their opposition to US-led containment efforts and plans such as Washington's proposed Golden Dome missile defense system, which they labeled as destabilizing. Quote, China will join with Russia in shouldering the special responsibilities of major powers, end quote, Xi reportedly told Putin, adding, quote, and work together to advance an equal and orderly multipolar world, end quote. A centerpiece of the visit was the signing of the joint statement on further deepening China-Russia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership of Coordination for a New Era. Quite the mouthful. Commemorating shared World War II victories and UN founding. Over 20 cooperation agreements were signed, ranging from global strategic stability to biosafety, investment protection, and digital economy, and even film collaboration. Economic ties are also set to expand, with Russia reportedly discussing increased participation in Russia's liquefied natural gas sector, and Russia's VEB Development Bank pledging $42 billion in funding for joint projects with Chinese firms. As both Xi and Putin position their countries as counterweights to US dominance, this visit marks a pivotal moment in the China-Russia relationship, projecting a united front to reshape the Western-led global order. Or to try, at least. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Friday, have a restful weekend, and I'll either see you this weekend or on Monday for another week of China Update.